Hey everyone, this is Rick, and welcome back to the Seed the Startup Journey, the entrepreneurship podcast sharing the origin stories of amazing founders and their companies in less than 20 minutes. Now today is a very special episode. We will be doing a joint interview with the Takeoff, which is a podcast and newsletter for students interested in learning more about startups and venture capital. And I'm super excited for today's guest, Jim McKelvey. Now, as someone who is a student at the McKelvey School of Engineering at WashU, I was super excited to have him onto my podcast. Jim McKelvey is a serial entrepreneur, most well known for starting Square with Jack Dorsey, who's the CEO of Twitter. And if you're not sure what Square is, whenever you walk into a store and you see a white device that you use to swipe your cards when you're paying for something, that is probably Square. Now, without further ado, let's jump right in.
Hey, Jim, thank you so much for coming on. Could you tell us a bit about what it was like during the earliest days of Square and what made you so confident in your former intern, Jack Dorsey?
I've worked with Jack since he was 15, so I've known him pretty well. Jack's nickname when he was 15 was Jack the Genius. We teased him about that around the office. But I've had a good working relationship with him for 30 years now. So he's a real bright guy and hardworking and fun to deal with. And so he asked me to start a company with him. And I was like, yeah, sure. What do you want to do? He had no ideas beyond that. I didn't have any at the time, so we cast around for some ideas and eventually came up with Square. But it was never a question about whether or not I wanted to work with Jack. It was a question about what we were going to do. And the good thing that happened was that in the middle of that, I was at my glass studio trying to sell some work and lost a sale because I couldn't take a credit card. And so that led to the idea for Square. And as soon as I had the idea, I called Jack up and he liked it too. So that's what became the start of Square.
That's awesome. Yeah. So my podcast is actually called The Seed the Startup Journey, where I interview entrepreneurs about their origin stories. And so that's why I'm super interested in the founding story of Square. And in particular, in your book, The Innovation Stack, you talked about how on the very first day of starting Square, you found out that what you wanted to do was illegal.
Yes.
Yeah. So most people, when they come up with an idea, they do research about it and they find someone else already doing it. That would lead them to stop working on the idea, let alone finding out, it's illegal. So I guess my question is, how should entrepreneurs assess their ideas and what factors should determine whether or not they continue with their idea or move on to something different?
You got to look at why something's illegal, okay? If it's sort of bad for the world and we've outlawed it, then you probably shouldn't do it. But if it's just some sort of holdover from a time when we weren't all as connected as we are now, and, there are laws in St. Louis where if you guys are in the dorms right now, there are laws about how many chickens you can have. I think a lot of laws just need to be updated. So we saw some laws that specifically prevented what Square was supposed to do, and we ignored them until we could get them changed or get compliant with it. But ultimately, I was pretty excited when I found that there was a reason people hadn't done what we were doing, because what I wanted to do seemed so obvious to me that my first assumption was, well, there are other people who've done this. Like surely some other smart person has had the exact same idea I did, because I don't think my ideas are that original. But it turned out that there were all these roadblocks. And when I saw the roadblocks, I got very excited because okay, great. Now all we have to do is get around all these roadblocks. I mean, we found, I think, 17 laws, rules, and regulations that, were sort of in Square's way. And I was like, oh, cool. Because if I find a way around all this stuff, there'll be no competition. So the no competition thing was true pretty much for the first 3 years. And then we got the worst competition of all, which is Amazon came in and decided that they wanted to basically take over our market and steal our product ideas and just wipe us out. And Amazon had a really good track record of doing that. Like when Amazon copies your product and undercuts your price, you end up dying. But it didn't happen in Square's case, which was amazing to me. I mean, the statistics would have said we should have been another, sort of dead body, stuffed in a smiling cardboard box. And the fact that Square survived was very good, but it was also very concerning because I couldn't explain why it happened. It's sort of like I had survivor's guilt of some sort. So that was what led me to do all the research for the Innovation Stack. I went looking for other companies that had, similar epic survival stories. And it turns out that by looking back in history, I found a bunch. So, and then I saw these patterns. It's like, oh, okay, I got to write a book about this because in fact, it happened to Square and probably 100 other firms. And interestingly enough, all those firms that I looked at had all become wildly successful. There was just massive impact from these companies. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this seems like a powerful phenomenon that at least nobody ever explained it to me.
That's actually like my next question, because, you talked about how Amazon basically copied your reader, they undercut your price, but facing this giant threat, Square basically decided to do nothing. So can you talk a little bit about that decision and what should entrepreneurs take away from that experience?
Yeah, Rick. So it wasn't that we decided to do nothing. It was that we decided to do nothing different. We were doing a lot. So we were really, really busy and we were really growing fast. But when Amazon showed up and presented this massive challenge, there really wasn't that much that we could do that made any sense to us. And I think the biggest example of that would be probably matching Amazon's price, which we couldn't see a way to mathematically do it. The price that we had chosen was chosen for a very good reason. We thought that we could eventually get profitable at that rate. And we were pretty certain that at the rate Amazon was charging, we would never get profitable. Therefore, we decided to ignore Amazon's pricing. And so we didn't even respond to that. And I think that was a good thing because it would not have been sustainable. I mean, Square would not exist today if we'd charged what Amazon was charging. If we had matched Amazon's price for a short period of time until they left the market, that would have really upset all our users when we went back to a price that was sustainable. So I'm really proud of the fact that the team at Square didn't respond. And that's actually a funny pattern that I saw with all these other companies too. And that is when, the Bank of Italy was attacked, when Southwest Airlines was attacked, when IKEA was attacked, when Birdseye was attacked, like when these other companies were attacked by, much, much more powerful forces, they just kept doing what they were doing and basically ignored it. And it turns out that ignoring your enemy is a really good strategy if you're an innovative company. If you're not an innovative company, it's probably deadly. But if you're innovative, then it's a pretty good move.
For sure. And most people, when they hear the name Jim McKelvey, they think of your success. So I was wondering if you could also share with us some of the moments when you failed and how those moments impacted you moving forward.
I mean, I consider most of the stuff that I do a failure until it eventually succeeds. So, I mean, I'll give you two examples from today. I mean, I'm trying to make these drinking glasses. I'm in the studio. I've been thinking about drinking a lot this year. They crack when I cut them. So I'm trying to find a saw that'll cut through glass and not shatter it. And the company that makes the saw has gone out of business. And the guy that used to make these things died. And there are like no saws on the planet that I can find. I basically have an unlimited budget to buy a diamond saw, and nothing that I can find is, so there's a problem. So that's a failure. Like we're not producing the stuff that I wanted to produce today because they're all blowing up on the saw. So, just this morning I had another meeting with another company that I have, and they're having all sorts of problems, and we're working on those. So I spend most of my days, because I'm an engineer by training, engineers don't work on stuff that's successful. They work on stuff that is not successful yet. And then once it's successful, you hand it over to the marketing department. Once it works, okay, I'm done. Like, get me out of the way. So, I think people see the stuff that I've been associated with once it's successful and they go, oh, well, McKelvey must be really excited about being so successful. It's like, no. That was just the last step. I mean, it took Square a year and a half to get out the door, So that's a year and a half of, I would say, intermittent failure. It's not working yet. It's not working yet. Still not working yet. Still not working yet. Say that for 18 months and then come up and finally it works. And everyone's like, whoa, you're such a success. It's like, well, you don't feel that way because your time as an engineer is spent dealing with things that don't work. But I also find it super exciting because when I do finally get something to work, the reward is way bigger than anything, it's just worth it.
What do you think are the most important skills and traits of founders?
If you are just trying to start a business, there's usually a formula that you can follow. So probably the greatest skill is your ability to learn and copy. That, however, is not sort of the only thing that I think smart people should limit themselves to. So, I mean, and look, this is the whole reason that I wrote this book is, I mean, if you read the book, it's dedicated to somebody who I will tell you is super competent, phenomenal talent, a phenomenal work ethic. And yet I've seen her over the course of, several years encounter problems where she says, oh, I can't solve this. Like, I'm not qualified to do this. And look, I think that's a reasonable excuse in most cases. Like, I'm not qualified to go out and fly a helicopter. If you think about the first human to do anything in the world, that person is never qualified. Like, the first time man flew a helicopter or an airplane, like, it was done by somebody who didn't know what the hell they were doing. Like, by definition, the first person to do it is always unqualified. And so my message to, entrepreneurs and people in general is, look, you will find at times in your life, not a lot of times, but occasionally you will be confronted with a problem that has not been solved and for which you can't just go YouTube your way to a solution. What do you do in that case? Do you sit there and say, like my friend does, hey, look, I'm not qualified, therefore I'm not going to do anything? Or are you going to be more like the Wright brothers and say, well, we're going to try to be the first people to do it, even though if we succeed, we will be unqualified?
Interesting. I like that. With some more, I guess, advice-related questions, what advice would you give to students interested in entrepreneurship?
I would say understand that there are two definitions of the word entrepreneur. The current one just means you have a business. You're not working for the man. You're working for yourself. You're your own employer. And if your goal is to start a company, then I would call you a business person, because historically the word entrepreneur used to mean somebody who started a business that was unlike any other business, i.e. they were doing something that was likely to kill them or not succeed. Take the Wright brothers. They had a bicycle shop, right? So they made and repaired bicycles. They were business people. Then they built the world's first airplane. And in building the world's first airplane, they were entrepreneurs. When the bicycle shop had a problem, they could go to 50 other bicycle shops and say, hey, how did you solve this problem? Or they could hire one of their employees, or they could go to the bicycle conference. So if somebody wants to be an entrepreneur, in most cases, what they mean is they want to be a business person. They just want to start their own business. I don't have a lot of advice for those people. They should probably go to business school and learn how to copy what everybody else does. If, however, you want to be an entrepreneur in the sort of historical sense, i.e. you want to do something that hasn't been done before, then you probably ought to be in the engineering school or the art school, where the discipline is more on how to think about problems that you don't know how to solve, or how to think originally and do stuff that's not all copying. But it's a much more difficult path to be an entrepreneur. The rewards are bigger, but it's way harder to walk that direction.
And on WashU specifically, what can the WashU community do to help make more students start companies of their own? And how can we incentivize entrepreneurship even more than it is today?
If you want to incentivize entrepreneurship, I would say form support groups. Like, get people together who are all similarly minded. And look, if you get enough of them together, I'll show up and we'll all bitch about what's not going right. Like, if you really want people together who are trying to solve unsolved problems, that's a super interesting group to hang out with. But the second thing I would say that's fairly unique about WashU, one of the things that made a big difference for me as an undergraduate was, going over to the art school and taking a class in glassblowing. Well, I ended up sort of doing that as a profession for a while. And the opportunity to encounter that was fairly unique, because if I'd chosen any other school at the time, there were, 5 or 6 glassblowing furnaces in colleges in the nation, and WashU had one. You go over to the medical school, they've got equipment that, there are 3 or 4 of these things in the world, and they've got one, So I would say, spend as much time out of your area of concentration as possible, because you're going to get a lot of really cool new ideas and you make some great friendships.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely trying to do that for the upcoming semester, like taking new classes. So you've also mentioned about support. Most of the entrepreneurs or business person we've interviewed talks about their mentors. So as students, how can we find good mentors, and what questions should we be asking them? If
it's been done before, find somebody who's done it. That makes a great mentor. Now, if you're embarking on another path, what I would say is, and you know, this, I spent the last 2 chapters of the book talking about this. And when people read the book who've, you know, sort of been entrepreneurs, they always tell me about the last 2 chapters. And I'll tell you right now, if you don't want to read the book, the answer is it's unpleasant, it's uncomfortable, it is terrifying, and not something that normal, sane, healthy people should do all their lives. You can do it for a while. So if you're looking for a mentor for that, I would say you're not going to get one. You may find a support group. You may find other people who are in it, but generally folks who have done it and been successful, they're so rare that it's hard to get time with these people. That said, you know, as a student, you really can reach out to alumni. And I mean, I occasionally meet with students, although most of them don't really want to do anything interesting and new. So I tend to disengage because I'm not, like, unless you're sort of working on a problem that I, 1, find interesting, and 2, somebody hasn't solved yet, like, then I'm not your guy, you know. But occasionally, you know, somebody will, you know, will come against something. Somebody from the medical school approached me the other day about something that was super interesting. Yeah, I may be working with them on it. So yeah, they're out there.
And so this is a question from my podcast audience, which is, what do you think is Square's competitive advantage versus other payment systems like Apple or Google Pay?
Read the innovation stack, and I described, you know, 14 things that we do differently. You know, that's the competitive advantage. Now, you take a company like Google or Apple that's a platform. The economics of a platform are way, way different, right? If you're a platform, you have different forces. For instance, there's certain things that Google can very, very easily do that they don't do, because to do so would attract the attention of the government and might hasten their demise. Likewise, there's some really vicious bullying tactics that I've seen both Google and Apple do to, you know, friends, companies and stuff. Like if you get, I had a friend that launched a search engine against Google, and things got so rough that both she and her husband ended up in the hospital, like for months. But those platforms are insanely powerful. But again, Apple's probably not getting up every morning thinking about how to make your payment experience better, whereas people at Square are. So hopefully that'll give us the ability to keep up with at least what the big platforms are doing.
For sure. So to wrap us up, we also prepared some rapid fire questions.
If you have a superpower, what would it be?
I'd like to fly. I think flying is just so darn cool.
And what is your favorite book? I guess, you know, if you don't count your own.
Satan, His Psychotherapy and Cure, by the unfortunate Dr. Kassler, JSPS. I believe it is out of print, but it is the most outrageously hilarious book I've ever read. And it's fiction, Jeremy Levin.
Interesting. Obviously, you're a big glass blower, but outside of work, what hobbies occupy most of your time?
Right now, I'm becoming a commercial pilot. So I'm trying to get type rated in big planes just because I think it would be fun to like fly charters for rich people and sit in the front of the plane and watch their crazy behavior.
Yeah. So who is your greatest source of inspiration?
Probably the folks that I meet in desperate situations, like the lady who cleans this office, just lost her son from COVID. And we talked about it a lot when she came in because, you know, her son had just died. And I'm like, why are you in here? And she's like, I can't stay home. I just cry. But, you know, the question is what, because I got a lot of resources now, like a lot more than I ever expected to have. So sources of inspiration right now are more from folks who I think can help me direct some of this in ways that could do good, because I was sort of unprepared. So I spend a lot of time right now just listening to folks who are having trouble. And, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I know a lot of friends who are unemployed. I hang out with homeless folks. I hang out with people who have been, you know, out of prison, you know, and I get a lot of inspiration from that, you know. I mean, I'm not like partying with tech entrepreneurs. They don't party anyway. I mean, we all show up at Marissa Mayer's house 3 times a year and sort of awkwardly say hi to each other. But
so I guess that's about it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to learn.
Cool. Thanks, guys. All the best.